Welcome everybody to our second webinar for this week during National Apprenticeship Week. We are going to be covering myth busting on autism. So we want to say thank you for everybody joining. We know you guys are all very, very busy, but we do appreciate you joining this free CPD webinar with us today. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. If you don't mind just keeping yourself on mute during the webinar, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. There's a chat box that you can ask any questions that you want our guest speaker today to answer for you. So please do use that chat box, and we will definitely get to your questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome our neurodivergent expert, Dr. Joanna Grace, to our webinar today. Today we'll be looking at examining what current research reveals about causes of autism. We're looking at challenges, one of the most harmful myths impacting neurodivergent children. We'll also look at introducing a simple test to help you determine whether your everyday approach are supportive or unintentionally counterproductive, and also looking at to clarify common misunderstandings and share practical strategies to help neurodivergent children and their peers better understand one another and thrive. But first, a little bit about our amazing speaker today. Dr. Joanna Grace is a leading voice in sensory engagement and inclusive practice, a TEDx speaker and a respected author, and she's also co-founded the Sensory Project that's got a meaningful, advanced meaningful inclusion for children and young people. Her tutoring has been recognised by Ofsted as an outstanding, reflecting her ability to inspire and connect with learners across both mainstream and specialist settings. Drawing a strong foundation of research alongside extensive hands-on experience, she brings depth, insight, and credibility to her work. Joanna's dedication is inclusion is not only professional but personal. It is grounded in her family's lived experience of disability and neurodiversity, and enriched by her experience as a foster parent to children with profound disabilities. Jo, over to you.
Thank you very much. It sounds so serious when you say it all together like that, doesn't it? I'm just going to share my screen. We were practicing this beforehand, and after you've made me sound so sensible, I should be good at it. Can you see the right thing?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm sorry I laughed at you when you called me doctor. I'm not used to that yet. I'm only 1 year old as a doctor, so it just still sounds like some other grown-up that you must be talking about. So I'm talking to you today. I'll introduce myself in a minute, but that's quite the rundown. It just means I'm old. That's what's happened. I haven't done all of those things at the same time. It's been ages since I was a teacher and a fairly long time since I was a foster parent, but I do collect all the, you do learn from your experiences and from your mistakes. A lot of what I'll be telling you is learned from my mistakes, not from any great success at doing all of those things. But today I was asked to myth bust autism for you, and it's a bit funny one to be asked to do, actually, because there's just something about calling it autism. It's like a tickle in your brain. It just sounds a bit odd to me, in the way that because it's not a thing, is it? It's people. Like, I'm an autistic person. My son is an autistic person. Some of the children I fostered were autistic people. Some of the people that I've taught are autistic people. They're not autisms. It would be like calling blonde people blondism. I've worked with some blondism. I've worked with some blue-eyedism, and it's a weird one, actually, because although it's funny to me, but it has actually been quite dangerous in the research when it gets considered as a thing separate to people in that way, because it implies all sorts of things, and it leads us down a dangerous road. So I guess one of the things I'm myth busting is the idea that there's autism, because it's autistic people. It's a group of people. It's a spectrum of people, and the reason that it's worth having these conversations is because there's a lot of them being had at the moment in ways that aren't helpful. So oh, here you go, Adele, this will be the thing. Will it turn over? No, it's not turning over. There we go. I found the right thing to click. Yeah, we've had lots of conversations about autism. If I could do the voice, it would make it so much better. Maybe I'll try. I'll practice in my own time. But here on this slide is a great giant orange what's it example of nonsense talked about autism and autism research and things like this. And if I'd been talking to you this time last year, it was about this time last year that he stood up and said, oh, you know, there's too much of this terrible autism around, and we're gonna work out what's causing it. Nobody knows what's causing it, and we're gonna sort it out. We're gonna find out what's causing it. And around in the saying of those things, he's describing it, and it is being described as a terrible disease. There is a lot of I was going to say promotional material. Well, that sounds like an odd type of thing, but I suppose it is, because it is put out by people selling services, selling medications, that describes autism as a thing that kind of takes over a person. And you know, like old sci-fis where something will come and take you over, and then you're a zombie and the person isn't really there anymore. You're just a zombie person, but you still look like the original person. The descriptions that they put out of what it is to be autistic do that same thing. They take away the idea of the person and they become just autism. You know, just it's that word. They are autism rather than an autistic person. So they have this autism thing, and it causes all these problems, and it causes a lifetime of suffering. And some of the rhetoric that came out of the States last year, if I put my glasses on, I can read what this chap said. These are kids who will never pay taxes because our only worth to society is whether we pay taxes or not. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. Hands up who plays baseball, because if you don't play baseball, you're a problem to society. And they'll never go out on a date. I've got a lot of friends who are mathematicians. They don't go out on dates either. Mind you, there's a fair overlap with the neurotype. Many of them will never go to the toilet unassisted. It's just so incredibly skewed and biased and based on very little at all. And this thing that takes over the person and then causes suffering, that suffering radiates to everybody around and everybody's lives. Autism destroys families. That is not what contemporary research says about the experience of autistic families. That is a very terrifying thing to hear. If you've just had a child diagnosed as autistic, you've just been told your family's about to be destroyed by this child. You might have you ever met families of people who have Down syndrome, who were told when their children were little, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, your child has Down syndrome, or there's a risk that this baby has Down syndrome. They'll talk to you when those children are older and say, I wish they hadn't said it like that, because it made me really frightened. It made me think something bad was going to happen. And actually what's happened is really fantastic. So you have all these grotty narratives. Oh, there's another one. This one is mostly perpetuated by a leading researcher in the UK who describes autistic people as not having emotion, not capable of empathy. And it's not just America that's putting out this sort of twaddle. We've got our own twits in the UK doing it as well. He said last year, he said, don't worry, I'm going to find out what's causing it. He said, research doesn't know what's causing it. I'll tell you, and I'll tell you by September, which was another one of those ones where you think, oh, hang on, that's not how research works, is it? You don't go, oh, we're going to find it out, and we'll be finding it out by 6 o'clock on September the 2nd. And I watched all of last year thinking, okay, what is he going to find? And then in September, he announced it was paracetamol. And you're just despairing of the man, because it's so much a fundamental misunderstanding of research. And when I've stopped ranting about him, I will explain to you about the research. But you know that research is not a thing where they know when they're going to find out the findings. You don't go, oh, I wonder whether it was a Big Bang, or we'll find out by Tuesday. That's not how research works. So that he announced that he was going to know by a certain time tells you that he is disregarding research. And then when he announced that it was paracetamol, actually I loved the internet at that point, because so many people hopped online to explain very clearly that correlation is not causation. So the reason he thought it was paracetamol is because he'd noticed that a lot of pregnant women take paracetamol. Guess what? Having a human grow inside you can be kind of painful. So people take painkillers, it's really important that you don't have a fever and things like that when you're pregnant, because it's dangerous to the baby. So people might take more paracetamol than usual. That doesn't mean that taking paracetamol causes either being pregnant, because there was a high correlation between pregnancy and paracetamol taking, or being autistic. One of the ones that I loved the most was the graphic that showed shark attacks against ice cream sales. The number of shark attacks goes up almost exactly in line with the number of ice creams that you sell, but selling ice cream doesn't cause shark attacks. Correlation does not equal causation. And then slightly after September, he said it was circumcision. And then I was really puzzled, because you think, are they taking the paracetamol to help with this? How is this causing people to be autistic? And in our own country, the narrative is about, snowflake parents or people being overly woke and making a fuss, and it never being about in our day. And yeah, all of that stuff. So there is a reason to have these conversations, because as ridiculous as the ones I've got on screen are, they add weight to the narratives here that are maybe not trusting what we do know from the science around research into autistic experience, and what we do know about the experience of these families. And that is a very real risk. And it's one of these things where, when you are somebody who would look at these claims and go, oh goodness, that's nonsense, it doesn't really feel believable that people would trust them. But there are people following this and believing this. And then there are all the levels underneath it. So there are all the other sorts of this end of this type of stuff that people are believing. And when you live a life that is privileged by being able to understand things, by having access to reliable people who inform you in a sensible way, it's hard to imagine the other version of it. But it's those, like there's a statistic in the UK, 1 in 20 children are a victim of sexual abuse in childhood. And I have been a primary school teacher, and you think, 1 in 20? That's 1 in every classroom, isn't it? And am I spotting them? Am I missing them? Where are they? Because I'm a part of the safeguarding here. And in the same way that there is that danger to children there is a danger to autistic children of narratives that promote. So I have met in my practice doing this sort of thing. So I go out and I talk to people. I do training in early years settings and care settings and things like that. And I was in an early years setting at the end of last year, and I had done a day about sensory experience and autistic experience. And at the end of the day, the staff queued up. It was very strange, actually. At the end of the day, the staff queued up to thank me, which is not normally how an end of a training day goes. Normally, a couple of people come by and go, thank you, that was really interesting, and everybody else just goes home. But in this setting, the staff queued up, and one by one, they said thank you. And there was a lady who I noticed, she waited till the end of the line, and her friend was kind of nudging her and going, yeah, go on, talk to her. And when she came up when it was her turn to talk to me, she said, thank you, it was very interesting. And I looked at her like, there's clearly something else you want to tell me. And she said, oh, am I allowed to ask you a question? I was like, yes, you're allowed to ask me a question. We'll have questions at the end of the day. You're allowed to ask me questions always. I can't promise I'll know the answer, but you're definitely allowed to ask. And she said that in her family, there was a little autistic boy, and that the family were saving money to send him abroad for treatment. And I spoke to her about what that treatment might be. And this is a little 4-year-old child in an early years setting in this country, whose family were collectively going to send him abroad to have something that will be indescribably terrifying happen to him. And it won't have any effect on whether he's autistic or not. And it will have enormous effect on that family's finances. And it will build up trauma. And narratives like these are adding weight to the voices of people who sell that sort of treatment. I witness So I'm big. I just put before, whilst Adele was introducing me, I put all my links to my social media accounts and my websites and things like that, my YouTube, in the chat. So if you want to find me online, you can. Because quite often you think of a question, you know, as you're driving to pick up the kids later, you won't necessarily think of a question. But if you think of the question, do send me a message in any of those formats to ask me, or you know, come and find me online. But I am a big occupier of online spaces, and some of the spaces that I occupy online are parenting groups for people who parent autistic children. And especially on Facebook, those are places where cure talk or, you know, treatment talk is really big. And I have watched parents from this country advise each other about bleach treatments. And we have the giant orange what's it to blame for the rise in those. And it's one of those things, again, you just think never. There is nobody who is thinking that putting bleach up the bottom of their child is going to in any way do something useful, but there are. And there are people putting their children on extreme diets or, you know, restrictive diets because they believe that it's some sort of gut problem. So these are incredibly dangerous narratives, which is why it's really useful to be clear about what it means to be autistic. And Adele has done the lovely, it's not turning over, it's not, there you go. Oh, this is one of the other things he was saying. He calls it an epidemic, doesn't he? There's this terrible epidemic happening. There's this rise, you know, here's the sort of the graph of the epidemic. Didn't used to be around in my day, and it's on the rise, except for this is a graph of left-handedness through time. Because there didn't used to be any left-handed people, because we didn't used to teach people to write. And then we started teaching people to write, and some people wrote with the wrong hand, so we hit them. So there was less left-handed people then, and then we slacked off on the hitting them a bit, and then suddenly they were bloody everywhere, but it did plateau in time. It's maybe more this, you know, here's the autistic epidemic graph, except for this one is homosexuality through time. Didn't used to be a thing because we didn't used to bother about who other people were sleeping with. Then we started noticing, and we decided you're only allowed to sleep with the opposite sex, and you got punished if you were homosexual. And then we had Kenneth Williams on the television, and then there was an outbreak. And by the difference between when I went to college and when my sister went to college was huge. When I went to college, and she's only 2-3 years behind me, she's younger than me. When I went to college, nobody was out. There was nobody, we were all straight, we were all completely straight, very dull. When she went to college, they were inventing sexualities right, left and centre, and hopefully her generation will have found a way of being that's authentic to them and live happier and healthier lives. So this is the autism graph currently, and it's not epidemic, it's not an outbreak of being autistic. There's as many autistic people around as there were before. It's an epidemic of understanding, because previously we have only understood what it means to be basically a white autistic boy, you know, and then we figured out, oh, there can be girls too, and maybe there can be people of other races and cultures. And we are I've been watching people get diagnosed in their 60s and 70s, and it's really interesting how that understanding of neurotype in later life, obviously you could go, what if they'd been identified sooner, how different their lives would be. But I witnessed them experience a kind of release, all the things that they thought they were getting wrong or doing wrong or being wrong, they're suddenly understanding and going, it's a neurotype thing. It wasn't like me not being good enough. It was that I didn't realize who I am. And there's this amazing liberation, like a gay person coming out of the closet. There's an amazing liberation in recognizing neurotype. So I presume there'll be a few more of us to come, and then it'll level off. Adele introduced me at the start, and I was supposed to introduce me at the start, but I was too busy wittering about the orange what's it. She said all the things about me. The relevance of all the things that she said is not that I was a teacher, so I know what you should do in a classroom, or I'm a parent, so you should parent your children the way I parent mine, because I work far too much to be a good mummy. They've got a good daddy, but I'm like a 1950s husband, you know. I go out to work, I come home, read them a bedtime story, and let my husband do the difficult stuff, buy them a present from the garage. So you shouldn't do any of the things, you know, the way that I've done them. The thing that is most relevant to you is I am a massive research geek. And so to underpin the work that I do, I set up the sensory projects. Oh, goodness. It's about 2 decades ago that I set up the sensory projects. And when I set them up, I didn't want them to be based just on my bright ideas, because I'm a very fallible human. I wanted them to be based on the research that was there. And so I tried to read it all, which is not something you can do, but I make a valiant effort. And then since then, I've done a PhD, which requires a whole lot more research reading. And I didn't used to tell people I was autistic professionally, because I worried that they wouldn't book me, you know, that they'd worry that I'd be socially glitchy the night before the conference. You know, sometimes you do these conferences where they take you all out to dinner afterwards, and I'm going to be awkward or eat the wrong things or need a reasonable adjustment. And so I didn't used to tell people. But then my eldest boy, who you can see in this picture, that's him when he's 5, he's 11 now. He wrote this book, My Mummy is Autistic. And I became the UK's most obnoxiously proud mummy. And I'm probably just a tiny little thing on your screen, so you're safe from me overdoing. But it is illustrated with all the kind of wonderful felt tip pen drawings that only 4-year-olds can produce. And it is about the language processing differences that I experience. And Routledge were really interested in publishing it, because they said ordinarily when you get a book about autistic experience, it's written by an adult about a child, and it kind of implies it's something you would grow out of over time, that adults are the ones explaining it. And this was a 4-year-old explaining the adult, and so they took his book. And then people started asking me if I was going to write an autism book, and I was like, nope, there's plenty of those, you don't need another one. But about a year later, my book, The Subtle Spectrum, was published. And that used to be the end of this story, but things have escalated since. So you see the little cheeky baby in the picture. I have one autistic child and one non-autistic child, as it turns out. And the small cheeky baby in the picture is the non-autistic child. He has grown up in a household where his big brother wrote a book when he was 4. And when he turned 4, he started coming home from grandma's house with bits of paper folded in half, telling me he'd written a book. And I would say, that's nice. And I'd stick it to the fridge, and then I'd put it in the recycling bin. And one day he said to me, when's my book going to be on the shelf like my brother's? And I was like, sorry, kid, no, yours is going in the recycle bin. It's not going on the shelf. But, you know, long story short, his book, My Daddy Is Not Autistic, is due out on the 20th of March. And I have a second book, The Scale of the Spectrum, that looks at the breadth of autistic experience, that is due out around about the same time. We're racing each other, so we don't actually know which book will come out first. But all of that is just a long-winded way of saying I read a lot of research. Everything I say from this point will be based on the research that there is, but I am one person. Maybe I'm not understanding what I'm reading. Maybe I'm only picking to read certain things. It's still a fallible viewpoint, but I collect together the research that I read to try and form it into things that will be useful to you. So things that we know from research, and this is where Trump misunderstands. I wasn't going to say his name, it feels like swearing. This is where the giant orange what's-it misunderstands it, because researchers never claim certainty. When they conduct research, they'll say things like, our findings suggest, or the results indicate that, because they recognise that they are always going to learn more. So they don't go, oh, we're done now, we've sorted it out, jobs are good and better go and work in Tesco's, because they are continuing to do research. So there is a huge lump of research that suggests, that indicates, that shows us that being autistic is an epigenetic condition. So the geneticists that study us, and I'm not a fan of the genetics research because the reason they're doing it is to try and find a way of identifying us before we're born so that we can not be born. But they've identified around 100 genes that are associated with being autistic, and it's the precise combination of those genes that you get that determines your place on the autistic spectrum. And the epigeneticness is the genes in the environment. So this was another one of these wonderful misunderstandings inspired by the What's It. People were thinking that when scientists say it's epigenetic, they mean it's genes and environment, in that it could be caused by your genes or it could be caused by your environment. And so there are people who believe that it's metals in the water, or I've got a neighbour who believes it's chemtrails, that the aeroplanes are sprinkling drugs onto us and that it's coming from the environment. There is a lot of autistic people in Silicon Valley, no surprises. So they're like, must be something in the water system, must be something. It's because autistic people are having sex with other autistic people and making little autistic babies, and then they work in tech. But it's the genes in the environment. So it means, you know, like a fish in the sea is having a fine old time, but if you put the fish on a beach, then it's really struggling. That's the expression of the genes in the environment. In the environment that you're made to be in, you thrive, and in an environment that you're not made to be in, you struggle. And that one is a really big one for education settings. In an environment that you're made to be in, you thrive, and in an environment not designed for the way that you genetically are, you struggle. The significance of them being old genes survive in our population because they have survival value. And so it tells you that through time, there has been a use to society of having different types of brains to do different types of things. And it just makes a kind of logical sense, doesn't it? We are puny little two-legged creatures, and we have survived through times where there's big four-legged monster creatures with teeth. We need people who are really good at bonding us together in groups, because if there's a lot of us little two-legged people, then we can maybe take down the big four-legged monster and group together and survive. So we need neurotypical people who are really good at creating those social bonds and creating community. We also need people who are really good at focusing on one thing and continuing to do that thing and not being distracted by other things, because they drive forwards. And it's like I was joking at the start, that we're not only valuable because we pay our taxes, we're also not only valuable because we progress science or invent, you know, probably a little autistic dude invented the wheel and then we could roll away from the monsters. We also needed the people with ADHD. They have a naturally jumpy attention span. They would be the people who were interested in the party and interested in what's going on with the invention of the wheel and notice the twig snapping outside the cave. They would have been the people who kept us safe. And I was reading somewhere recently, and I can't remember where, that they think they are the legacy of the hunters. We would have existed in these tribal groups, surviving off nuts and berries, and we would want protein, you know, a good bit of meat. And the people who go, what's that in the bush? What's that noise over there? They would be the ones that found that for us. And they'd have been hugely valuable members of our society. If you take the average kid, not that there is one, with ADHD now, and look at what they suffer from, they don't generally suffer from the jumpy attention span. They suffer from a lifetime of being told that they are wrong and bad for having the brain that they have, that they are naughty for having the brain that they have. You know, if you took a wheelchair user and told them off for not being able to walk, by the time they were 7 or 8, they'd be acting up a bit as well. And what we have is a system that demands a particular neurotype that not everybody has. And we operate in environments that offer a thrive environment to a neurotype that not everybody has. The results of these different genetics is different wiring patterns in the brain. And so that slide that I was just on, that's my I have read lots of genetics research slide. This is my I have read lots of neuroscience research slide. And you can tell by the way I'm talking about these things that I'm not a geneticist or a neuroscientist. I am somebody who's good at using a dictionary, and I will sit and persist with these papers until I understand them. But the neuroscientists that study us image the brain at 3 different levels. So I've got 3, these scans on the screen are examples of these different imaging techniques, but you will know them. So have you ever seen a documentary where they like play somebody music and then they show you a scan of the brain with blobs of colour lighting up. They study us at blobs of colour level. They can see the patterns of where, you know, you play this song and that blob lights up and this blob lights up. And when they look at autistic brains compared to non-autistic brains, the blobs of colour are in different places. They study us at wiring pattern level. So if you imagine the neurons in the brain like a road network and they're looking at the map of that road network, they can see the pattern of the wiring in a neurotypical brain is different from the pattern of a wiring in an autistic brain. And they study us at a molecular level. So they study the firing of electricity through the synapses. That's the picture that's closest to the writing on my screen. So little tiny, this pulsing of electricity, and it is different in autistic brains to non-autistic brains, in ADHD brains to non-autistic, to neurotypical brains. And the reason that I'm emphasizing this so much is to point out this is a brain difference, not a behavior difference. Because anywhere you encounter descriptions of what it means to be autistic or descriptions of what it means to have ADHD, you encounter descriptions of behavior, which makes it sound like it's something people are doing, like they're acting up, they're behaving a bit autistic. It also makes it sound like it's something that you could correct by changing the behavior. And it makes it sound like it's something they're doing, not something they're being. It creates debates that wouldn't exist if we were truly recognizing the epigenetic nature, the physiological reality of. So, for example, a few years ago, I was being booked everywhere to talk about fidget toys, because there's lots of schools either deciding all the children could have fidget toys or banning all the children from having fidget toys. Schools were really committed to a one-size-fits-all approach. It would be either every table has got fidget toys on it, nobody is allowed fidget toys. I did meet one school that allowed fidget toys, but only if they were school branded fidget toys. So they'd got a selection of approved school fidgets and you could fidget with them, but you couldn't fidget with something else. And you think, if you are viewing being autistic as an epigenetic condition, as a physiological difference in the brain, and then you are recognizing a fidget toy as some way of bridging the difference between the brain that you're living through and the environment that you're being asked to live in that's not set up for that brain, then it's the same as a white cane for a child who's blind. That is a tool that bridges the gap between a physiological reality in that child and an environment that's not built to, you know, to be a place where that physiological reality thrives. And I've never encountered schools going, should we allow white canes or should we not allow white canes? Nor have I encountered schools giving every child in the school a white cane because somebody needs a white cane. And then for the, you know, you have to use the school fidget toy. You don't just use any old white cane, do you? You get the right white cane for that child. And that is not a simple thing. That's, you've got to calculate it, you've got to measure it, you've got to understand their experience, you've got to work it out what's the right one. And even then it's more complicated because you don't just hand it over and go, well, there you go. There's a whole training program where people learn how to use their white canes. And those debates that come up, or, you know, should we allow fidgets or not, is us missing the point that this is a physiological reality. And I would love to be able to go, here's loads of ways of helping autistic people, but we've got very tiny amounts of time. So on the QR code on the screen now, that links you to a Facebook photo album that is publicly available. So you don't have to make friends. You're welcome to make friends with me or follow me, I think you have to do now. But you should be able to see it whether you're on Facebook or not. And it's 50 strategies that are useful ways of supporting autistic people in education or in work. All of those strategies are a bit like the fidget toys. Like, a fidget toy can be really useful to support somebody, or it can be completely pointless. And it's not necessarily having the object or the idea, it's the understanding that underpins it. And the bit that I think is most important there is that understanding that this is a way of being, not a type of doing. This is a physiological difference, not a behavior difference. And if you're starting from that point, the thoughts that you build onto that foundation will be more reliable than the ones that just go, they're being naughty, give them a fidget toy and they'll stop being naughty. Before I click this slide over, obviously I am condensing lots of different research into something that I hope is accessible. But when you do that, there's always things missing. There's always more nuance to it than I can convey in one little bit of chatting to you. But just sneak in a bit of nuance. I've said they can see the difference between the brains. What they can actually see is a neurotypical brain. There is a very well understood pattern to the where blobs of colour light up in a neurotypical brain. There's a well understood pattern to the roadmap of the neurons in a neurotypical brain. There's a well understood pattern to the firing of synapses in a neurotypical brain. What they can see is the difference from that established pattern. So if you imagine it like tartan, a neurotypical brain is tartan. We're not saying all neurotypical people are the same. We're saying there's lots of different tartans. Each tartan is individually woven, but you can tell when something's tartan. And you can also tell when something's not tartan. But within the not tartan, the division into particular types of not tartan, ADHD, autistic, OCD, those divisions are a more questionable thing. And also the idea that there is a kind of uniformity within those divisions. So what they can do is they can pop a brain into the scanner and go tartan. And then they pop an autistic person into the scanner and they go not tartan. But you pop another autistic person into the scanner and they don't match. So I stole this little quote from one of the neuroscientists because I loved it. She described us, she said, autistic people have uniquely unique brains. And she means unique as in other from the expected norm, and then uniquely unique in that they are other from each other. And so the next big red flag I would want you to watch out for is any approaches that describe autistic people as a whole. You know, this works to sort out autistic people. Autistic people do this because by definition, autistic people are different from one another, more different from one another than non-autistic people are. And it's that is the reason for the spectrum. You know, when you hear autistic spectrum, what's intended to be pointed to with that word is the huge diversity of autistic people, not a linear spectrum like the one on the screen that goes from people who are not very autistic, like myself, all the way down to people who are very terribly autistic, like some of the children I used to foster. Or sometimes people do that spectrum, they put everybody on it, don't they? They go, everyone's on the spectrum somewhere. And autistic people get so cross with them when they do that. But the idea is that there would be somebody who's very autistic. So that would be somebody who doesn't use mouth words, somebody who needs continuous support in their life. Then sort of midway along the spectrum would be somebody like me who's not very autistic. And then just over the other side would be somebody who isn't autistic, but they are really organised and good at maths. And then who's down the far end of that spectrum? Like somebody who's like out at parties all the time and on the phone to their mate, like the severely neurotypical person. It's not that sort of spectrum at all. And there's a lot of misunderstanding created by things like saying everybody's a little bit autistic or we're all on the spectrum somewhere. We are not. It's more of this sort of spectrum. So you might have seen these where you get a colour wheel spectrum and then different colours would be labelled with different traits of being autistic. So you might have things like sensory differences or communication differences, executive function differences. That's the way your brain organizes information, and then you would draw somebody on it. So this person has got a lot of executive function differences, or this person has got a lot of sensory differences, or have I got all clicked the wrong thing? This person's got some executive function, you know, they're all different. You hear people call spiky profiles. If you had those three people lined up, how would you say which one is more autistic and which one is less autistic? It's a nonsense. It's not a thing that lines up like that. When people are using terms like that, what they mean, what they are describing is their own experience of the other person being autistic. So when they say I'm mildly autistic, they mean that my being autistic doesn't affect them very much. And when they say my foster daughter is extremely autistic, they mean that because she makes loud noises and jumps up and down, they are very affected by her being autistic. The fact that when she's doing that, I'm probably being equally bothered by the same buzzy noise in the background, but I'm choosing to suppress it, doesn't count to them. because what they're judging it on is their experience of somebody else's life. The autistic community would refer to the difference between me and my foster daughter. I would be an autistic person with low support needs, and she's an autistic person with high support needs. That's the language that is embracing of people. But anyway, this, even within that colour spectrum version, there's still a huge amount of deficit and pathology and bias built into it by the researchers that have created it. So I would still be cautious of it and check, are you hearing autistic voices in these spaces? Are you hearing people be referred to as autistic people? Or are you hearing something that fits more with the giant orange Watsits narrative of there being people with this terrible disease that is autism? And my litmus test that you promised at the start is, it will sound silly, but I've run through that science super fast as well. So if you want me to go back over anything that I've just gone through with you, do pop in the chat. Do, you know, when we get to questions, which is just in a few minutes time, you can ask a question, or you can just say, talk more about that, and treat me like a jukebox. But the distinction between behavior or being is the really important one when it comes to how you're applying the strategies, how you're offering support. Because if you're viewing it as a form of behavior, what you will go to in your mind is consequences and causes, isn't it? You do what happened before the behavior. Do you do your ABCs? I was trained to do my ABCs as a primary school teacher. So you do antecedent, behavior, consequence. What happened before the behavior? Did they push the other child because somebody took their pencil? What was the behavior? They pushed the other child. What happened as a consequence of that behavior? They were sent out the classroom. And then you try and work out, is it the antecedent that's causing it, or is it the consequence that's causing it? Maybe they pushed the other child because they wanted to leave the classroom, and that was the way. Maybe if we change the consequence, that will change the behavior. Maybe if we change the antecedent, that will change the behavior. You cannot antecedent, behavior, consequence, cause, consequence. Imagine that as an approach to blindness. It would just be ridiculous. And this child keeps bumping into things. Well, what happened before they bumped into things? Well, her friend said this to her. What happened after she bumped into something? I shouted at her and told her not to bump into things anymore. She seems to still be bumping into things, because it's not a behavior. The behavior, the thing that you see, the bumping into things that you see, is an expression of being, and it's an expression of a physiological reality. If you are recognizing the behavior that you see as an expression of being, then you don't go for causes and consequences. So you don't go for all the cat. I meet settings where they go, we've tried everything. And what they mean by everything is the carrot and the stick. In all sorts of carrots and all sorts of sticks. We took his iPad off him if he did that. We no playtime. It's like, it wouldn't work. If you recognize it as being, you witness the behavior, and the response isn't causes and consequences, it's compassion and curiosity. Because the behavior that you'll pick up on is behavior that people don't want, and you'll go, gosh, like, what situation are you in that's making you behave like that? And how can I figure it out? And you must be really stressed if you're behaving like that. So my litmus test for your strategies is, would it help a cat in a swimming pool? And it's not a perfect one, but just to run through some of the strategies that I encounter in this line of work. So, for example, the cat in the swimming pool, terribly scratchy, that cat. That cat needs to learn that it is not okay to scratch other people. So what we'll do is we'll give it a star chart, and every time it doesn't scratch somebody, we'll give it a star. Not going to help the cat in the swimming pool, is it? What about the cat in the swimming pool seems really anxious. It doesn't feel very calm. It needs to learn how to be calm. We'll do a mindfulness program with the cat in the swimming pool. It's not going to help. What about the cat gets really stressed in the swimming pool? So once an hour, we'll take it out of the swimming pool, put it somewhere else, let it dry off for a bit. Seems to help. It gets much less stressed, much less bitey, much less scratchy. And then we'll lob it back in the swimming pool. Yeah, there's kind of like a, oh, almost. So the myth busting, it's not a thing, it's people. there's not an autism. Just in the same way there isn't a blondism or a blue-eyedism, there are people, blonde-eyed people, autistic people, blue-eyed people, gay people. It's a physiological reality in the brain, and you witness it through difference in behavior, but it is not a behavior. That behavior is an expression of a physiological reality, and people thrive when they are in environments that are designed for who they are and how they are. And you can't cause and consequence somebody. You can't, even if you shouted at that cat to the point where it kept its claws in and it didn't bite anymore, you wouldn't have helped it. You'd just have a very emotionally damaged cat in a swimming pool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I hope you got the little QR codes along the way. You will find them all in the chat anyway. And if you want to ask me questions, there you go. Now I can see the chat box better now, and Adele will tell me what to answer if I've missed them.
Thank you so much. I was literally sitting at the edge of my seat, Jo, so that was amazing. Thank you. We've got quite a few questions, and we had some sent as well previously. So we've got Catherine has asked, I had people feeling reluctant to seek a diagnosis. So I'm wondering, how can an autism diagnosis support people, and what can come afterwards? I mean, yeah, you can go for that one, but I know how much
I can do that one. I'll just do. Somebody said the QR code is broken. Sorry about that. You've got the link to my Facebook, and it's a photo album on my Facebook, so you'll be able to find it from that if you scroll up in the chat. Yeah, people are reluctant to seek a diagnosis of being autistic. It's not our place to tell them what to do in that regard. That's their own choice. I think it can help sometimes to imagine it like the gay narrative. Imagine if you're the early years setting and you've spotted that I'll try again. If you're the parent that thinks, I think my child is gay, you don't go into the closet and get them out. You create an environment in which you explain that you are okay with this, in which you give a representation of the you could imagine lots of gay children in the 1950s thinking, I'm not Kenneth Williams. I'm not like that. I don't want to be like that. Is this what, does it mean that I can't have a family? Does it mean that I'm never going to get married? Does it mean that I have to, wear pink or something? And when you see a diversity of representation, it's an easier thing to approach, but it is something to support families with at the moment. So you get misunderstandings in terms of what people think it means to be autistic. So if you approached a family and said, we've noticed a few differences with your child, we think they might be autistic, and you get a big, no, they're not. No, they're definitely not. No, there's none of that in my family type of thing. It's interesting to ask them what they are understanding by that word. Because in situations where, so for example, my dad is autistic. My dad is the absolute classic, very quiet, very mathsy, very socially awkward, very just does one thing. He is the person that the diagnostic criteria was written to find. And when I was diagnosed, I said to Dad, I was like, well, you're where I got it from, aren't you? And he said, oh, I'm not autistic. And I was like, well, you so are, Dad. Like, I could stand you up in front of any number of people and they'd all say no, I'm not. I don't know why you'd say that. I'm not autistic. I'm not autistic. And I had that chat with my dad for about 3 years before it occurred to me to go, Dad, what do you think I mean when I say you're autistic? And his understanding of it, he was imagining like somebody locked up in an asylum in a straitjacket. And I was like, no, what I mean is, X, Y, and Z. He's like, oh, if you just mean that I really like boats and I'm a bit awkward to talk to down the pub, then fine. And families exist in this world where Mr. What's-It's narrative is prevalent all over the place. So when you say, I think your child might be autistic, you're saying, I think your child might never be able to pay taxes and never use the toilet and be total useless and cause you all this suffering. And they go, no, absolutely not. So it's about giving the information and looking at where people will take their information from. Sometimes just recommending a TV program. They're not perfect, but those ones that Chris Packham did a few last year, Inside Our Autistic Minds, Inside Our ADHD Minds, did show a representation of the diversity of the spectrum and gave different perspectives and things like that. I'm just
Yeah,
realizing
no,
there's more questions, and if I spend 10
no,
minutes
it's all right.
answering
I
every
totally
one of them.
agree with you. Just from my personal experience on autism diagnosed for my stepson, it really helped with support at school, because there was extra support could be put in place. But without that, schools are very reluctant to put support in place. So
Yeah.
it can help. So just from a parent's perspective, Tony has said many of her clients, mostly female, with a late diagnosis, who suspect they have ADHD, ADD, or autism, are all struggling to run their businesses. So I'm assuming from that.
Oh, I shouldn't laugh. I've got so many friends who are like that. Yeah, it's the classic one is late identified ADHD people struggling to do the paperwork that's required to get the ADHD diagnosis, because you've got these kind of jumpy attention span brains, and you've got paperwork on the table that I've got to fill out to find out if I've got ADHD, but then you do a different task. And I was doing a support group meeting last week, and there was a lady who's really struggling, and she was saying, I think if I get a diagnosis that might help, because then some people might understand me better, and I might be able to get this accommodation, and whatever it was. And the lady across from her said, yeah, I'm same situation. And she said, but I've had the paperwork for 6 weeks and I haven't filled it in. And the lady across said, I've had it for 6 months and I haven't filled it in. So it's I'm laughing at it because one of those women was my friend, but it's a really significant issue if you have executive functioning differences. And to what tends to get people give you strategies that are designed for a disorganized neurotypical person. They go, oh, why don't you just write it in your diary? Why don't you, just set a reminder on your phone? Why don't you do, which would work for like a disorganized neurotypical person, but they won't necessarily work if what you're dealing with is a difference in the way your brain is processing that information. And understanding that reality, I think a lot of help is just, because we're always really harsh on ourselves, aren't we? Like, if it can stop you from criticizing yourself so harshly. Imagine if the blind kid told themselves off for not being able to see. I'm so useless. I wish I should just try harder. If I just tried harder, if I made more of an effort, all my friends can see. I should be able to do it if all my friends can do it. And it's that same thing. We're often being really harsh on ourselves because we can't do the things that other people can just straightforward do. So finding strategies that support neurotype, recognizing neurotype is really useful.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. Got a question from Jennifer asking, what do you capture sense?
Oh, you've gone very hiccupy. Elaine, do you know which one she was asking?
Let me just have a look. I've got one in from Deb that says, my son is blind and mildly autistic, had to fight for everything when he was at school. Now nothing available as an adult apart from one group twice a week for 3 hours. Very interesting session, thank you. So that's a mum that's been fighting and struggling by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I live in rural Cornwall, Deborah, and there's a centre down here that's a day service, and you can only get a place when somebody who attends dies, and you're literally filling dead men's shoes. It's very tough. Sorry, Adele, you went very glitchy, so I didn't hear which question you read.
That's okay. So there was a question from Jennifer asking, what are your thoughts on a one cap fits all morning sensory circuit in a very well-meaning primary school?
Yeah, it's lovely. But the primary schools that went, we'll put fidgets on the table for everybody, were lovely places. It shows a willingness to understand. If you were the kid who needed the exact fidget and I put all the fidgets out and you got one that was kind of like it, you've been a bit helped, but it's not a one size fits all thing, and it's not the teachers or the teaching assistants' fault there. They're working in a system that demands that they deliver a one size fits all approach. I've had a lovely meeting with a head teacher of a 8-year-old girl who was struggling to attend her school, and the school were really, really keen that this autistic girl feel at home and feel a sense of belonging within their school community. They really loved her. They really wanted to be able to adapt to the environment to provide for her. And they'd done all manner of things. And I had this meeting, it was with the head teacher, her class teacher, the teaching assistant that she got on with the best, and her mum, and they were all there. And the head teacher had found me, you know, she's like, we will do anything. We've tried this, we've tried this, we've tried this. And we went through it. We sort of chatted to each other for a couple of hours. And at the end of it, I was saying to her, realistically, you are always going to be a room with 30 other people in. And she is always going to struggle with being in a room with 30 other people in. So if you want to become an inclusive space for her, you would have to get rid of some of the others. Because we've got, and people who live in diverse households where different neurodivergent and neurotypical people have different needs within one household will understand that issue so well. I've got a family that I talk to quite often where both of the children are autistic and they manage to go to school, but it takes a lot out of them to go to school. So when they come home, they need to, you know, cope with all that they've had to do to go to school. One of them needs total silence, just to like lie in a darkened room and get over all the hustle and bustle of being at school. And the other one needs to let off steam, jumps off the furniture, you know, whoops and jump. And they need completely opposite things, and they're living in one household. And that's one little family of 4. And you take that up to 30 in a classroom or 35 in a classroom, and it's a really massive ask. But having a community understanding can help. So if you have children, if you're working in settings where people can learn what's useful to them and what's useful to other people. So I was really lucky because I do this sort of thing. When my son was at primary school, when my autistic son was at primary school, I managed to get into the school and I taught his class for half a term's worth of Tuesday afternoons. And I taught the whole class about neurodivergence, because a lot of the strategies that we use for supporting autistic people or ADHD people involve taking that autistic person or taking that ADHD person and teaching them something. But actually, if you want people to be included in society, it's the whole of society that needs to learn. You know, like the football campaign that sexism in football is a man's problem type of thing. It's the dominant group that need to make the adjustments. So teaching everybody how to understand. You want to put all the fidget toys out on the table. You say to the children, okay, here's the fidget toys. How do you learn best? Are you learning best when you're fidgeting, or are you learning best when your hands are still? Do you learn best when you take notes? And you create a system in which everybody evaluates, and then the expectation is you are responsible to act in the way that you learn best, and that doesn't stop your neighbours on your table from learning. And then all of us have been damaged by systems that demand a one size fits all. You know, the people who come to, what was there was some ridiculous, oh, it's the attendance stuff. I've been reading all the attendance research. this correlation not cause problem again. They go, well, the people who attend school 100% of the time are also the people who get the best jobs and do better in later life. Therefore, attending school 100% of the time means you get a better job. And you're like, or could it be that the people who found it really easy to attend school 100% of the time are also the people for whom adult life is set up for as well, and that just privilege sustains privilege? That could be the option as well. If you create these evaluative spaces where people are recognizing and understanding difference, then hopefully you can create a community experience that's not just better for the autistic people, better for all the people. But that's a very it's nice to have high ideals, isn't it? It's very difficult to action them in practice.
Joe, I've got one question, and it would be really good if you could answer this one. It's from a lady called Julie. She's saying, my 13-year-old grandson is autistic, and currently we are struggling with him biting his fingernails so badly that they bleed. And we have tried fidget toys, we've used storybooks, pics for emotions. He is verbal, and we've tried social stories as he does get a lot of bowel and tummy infections due to his nail biting. The school is supporting, but we are all hitting a brick wall. How we can support him? Any suggestions from your experience we will welcome.
Yeah. So I have an 11-year-old son that I have taken to A&E 2 3 times now with infections on his fingernails. So I know the story. We haven't had bowel and tummy infections from it though. I guess that's to do with what's on his fingers rather than the biting, because obviously your body's made of your body, so it won't mind. It's massively hard. I think, and so should show you my son's. We haven't been to A&E for a while, so I think things are getting better for us, but I wouldn't be suggesting there's any overnight cures. The fidgets didn't work for us. Biting other things didn't work for us, and it's such a hard ask, because the reason he was starting to bite is because something felt a little bit different. So biting a fidget isn't going to make you, you know, if there's a little thing sticking out and you can feel it, biting something else isn't going to change that. Having lots of hand cream and things that he can rub into his hands instead. So he's got, by his bed, he's got all these hand creams that he can rub into his hands. He's got nice soapy things that he likes, and that's just, I'm just lucky in that way that he appreciates those things. But keeping the skin health good so that he wasn't triggered to bite them was one thing that was useful to us. All the things that were about telling him, don't bite your nails, bite this instead, all of those things, they were so tempting, and we did probably a good 2 years of them, and I'm pretty sure that some of us are still doing them. But you know, when somebody says don't think about the elephant in the room, and then you think about the elephant, all they did was refocus attention on the finger biting. So in the end, I viewed it as like a seesaw, and I've got on one end of my seesaw, I've got the finger biting, and that goes up when he's stressed, when he's tired, when he's, you know, when his fingers are got little bits sticking out that are bothering him. And it's been working out what I can put on the other end to balance it away. What activities does he do where he doesn't bite his fingers, and how can I create more of those? In what circumstances is he less likely to bite his fingers, and how can I learn from those circumstances what he needs in other circumstances? And I've just been shifting the balance very slowly. If you saw my son's finger, he's got, you know, he's just got the nail bed, so I haven't gone, da-da, I've solved the problem. But we haven't been to hospital recently, which counts. And that's a different thing, is it's not just your children that exist in a world that presumes a neurotype they don't own. You exist in it too. And all the advice that you get given, so I meet this a lot when autistic people are not sleeping properly. The parents will be getting all the advice on how to make your child go to sleep, or when they're not eating in a normal way. You get masses of advice. When your child eats in an atypical way, the community around you will tell you very confidently, well, just starve them until they eat the proper food, or don't give them their pudding until they eat the proper food. And the same with fingernail biting. The community has got an answer to fingernail biting. It's that paint that you paint on their fingers and then they don't like the taste. It doesn't. They'll just get used to the taste. It might work, you know, it's worth a shot, but it can make you feel like you're personally doing something wrong because all this good advice that you're being given isn't working for you. So it's something's going wrong with your parenting. And just recognizing that you're playing a different game, that this is not a like for like comparison. You know, we've got the Winter Olympics streamed in all parts of this household, and we are looking forward to the Paralympics. Yeah, if you had the Paralympic players alongside the, you know, the mainstream players, it's not the same game. It's a very different game. And for me, in my sort of fairly similar situation there, I'm considering that we've not gone to A&E for a while to be progress. I'm not looking for him to have like long fingernails and painted nails for a good while, but it's easing as his environment gets easier for him. And I'm sorry you're having that experience.
Bless you. Thank you so much, Jo. That was great. I think we are at the end of our time, and now we can see the numbers starting to go because people need to get back to settings. But
That's
this
fine.
has been fantastic, and thank you so much for all your insights and all the information you shared with us. And I think it really does make you stop and think, actually, all the nonsense we listen to in the press and how it does actually impact our thoughts and our behaviours. So
I have to have him on a slide now. It's just ridiculous. But yeah, it's worth it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Different things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.